Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are tackling a really fundamental challenge in communications, one that, well, it plagues pretty much every large organization. How do you take something that's inherently dry, a mandatory corporate announcement, a press release just packed with data, stats, legal stuff, and turn it into a story? Like a story a journalist doesn't just have to cover, but actually wants to cover. So we're focusing today on probably the single most critical element for getting that media pickup, crafting effective quotes for business leaders in PR materials. We've gathered the sources, looked at the research, and yeah, we're going to extract those specific techniques. The ones that really turn an obligatory sign-off into a soundbite people actually remember and use.
That's absolutely right. Yeah, think of it this way. If the press release is the factual chassis of the announcement, the quote is the emotional engine. Our sources make it super clear. These statements are the company's voice, their values, their vision, all condensed down. And it's the most quotable format possible. It's basically the essential shortcut for the journalist. So our mission today is to move beyond just saying, ooh, that's a good quote, and really find those specific actionable techniques, the ones that make sure a quote gets published, not just, immediately discarded. We found that really every powerful quote has to do three things at once. First, grab attention, usually with some real emotion or insight. Second, provide context that, well, the data paragraphs just can't. And third, and this is really critical, it has to give journalists a compelling angle, like a human angle or maybe a visionary one for their coverage.
Okay, let's unpack that. Starting with the basic purpose. I mean, if we've already detailed all the facts and figures in the release, why do we even need the CEO's voice in there?
It comes down entirely to human connection.
Yeah.
And trust. Press releases are inherently formal, right? They often feel cold, a bit distant, because they're driven by objective facts. You need those quotes to add that essential human touch, to turn these dry, abstract concepts into stories people can actually relate to. People don't connect with data points, They connect with passion, with motivation.
Right, and crucially, it's a massive trust builder. When you include genuine, direct statements from leaders, you're building credibility in a way that, third-person descriptions just can't match. If the CEO speaks directly, uses I or we about why they're doing something, well, that carries so much more weight than standard marketing copy just attributed to the company.
Exactly. That is the difference. The difference between a statement that builds trust and one that merely, informs. And journalists, they are so keenly attuned to manufactured messaging. Yeah. They specifically look for that authentic voice. The founder's real conviction, the CEO's personal reason. They want that over the boilerplate corporate speak because they know that's what their readers will actually connect with.
Yeah, the source material really hammers this idea of the quote as an emotional anchor. It has this dual purpose, connecting the audience with the passion behind the announcement, but also simultaneously giving the journalist that human angle they need to sell the story to their editor. We're talking about a leader expressing genuine excitement, or maybe even better, sharing a personal challenge that this new thing overcomes.
What's fascinating, I think, is that the quote is the actual mechanism that transforms just information into a story worth telling. It works simply because it provides that emotional context. It tells the reader how they should feel about the facts they just read. Without that anchor, really, you're just reading a transaction notice. It's flat.
That distinction, transaction versus story, that takes us straight into the absolute non-negotiables. These are the things that, look, if you ignore them, your quote is basically guaranteed to end up on the cutting room floor. And the foundation, the very first thing you have to nail, it's the tyranny of the word count. Brevity.
Brevity. It's not just a suggestion. It's like a structural necessity. It's driven by journalistic standards. And that constraint, it forces clarity. It forces punch. The data consistently tells us the target is under 20 words. Ideally, you should really be aiming for that sweet spot, 15 to 20 words, maximum.
Why so strict?
Because anything longer, anything stretching past that limit will probably just get edited down by the journalist anyway. And in doing that, they might accidentally strip out your core message. You want to hand them the perfect, headline-ready soundbite on a plate.
Yeah, I think that 20 words or less rule is maybe the hardest one to follow. Because leaders, naturally, they want to qualify everything, contextualize every statement. But, okay, let's say we nail brevity. The second non-negotiable is genuine emotion. This is the hurdle where I find most corporate comms teams stumble. And it results in what we call those generic excitement statements.
Oh, generic excitement. It's an instant quote killer. Why? Because it's not unique. It's not unique to your announcement or your company. If the quote doesn't reveal real passion or conviction or a specific point of view, It's just instantly forgettable. We have to show some vulnerability, maybe, or conviction.
The sources gave a fantastic contrast here. Instead of the totally generic, we're excited about this partnership, which, let's face it, every company says every single day, we swap it for something genuinely impactful, something emotional. This partnership solves a problem that's kept me up at night for 3 years.
That's the difference. One quote just takes up space. The other creates intrigue. It implies pain, struggle, and ultimately relief. Gives immediate context, reveals motivation. The generic excitement thing, any company could say that about any minor update. But the kept me up at night line, that's specific to the leader, to their commitment. It's authentic vulnerability, but used as a strategic communication. It's powerful.
Okay, so brevity, emotion. The third piece has to be believability. How do we make sure this doesn't sound like it was written by, 3 different lawyers and approved by a committee? It needs to sound like actual human speech.
Absolutely. It must pass the read aloud test. Seriously, read it out loud. If it sounds unnatural or stilted or just overly formal, it's going to sound manufactured to the media. And this is where we issue that crucial warning. Avoid the scripted, terrible jargon, please. Phrases like synergistic value proposition or leveraging core competencies. They don't make the leader sound smart or strategic. They actually signal to the journalist that the speaker is hiding behind corporate armor. It kind of implies a lack of confidence in the actual facts, forcing them to use this unnecessarily complex language.
That is such a sharp insight. The jargon isn't just annoying. It's actually a signal of insecurity. But what if the leader only talks in really technical terms or committee-approved phrases? How do we translate that authenticity without, oversimplifying the core message?
Well, that's where that conversation technique comes in, which we'll get to in a second. But basically, you need to find the simple, specific consequence of all that technical work. Don't quote the technical phrase itself. Quote, the passion behind solving the problem that the tech addresses.
Got it. Okay, let's pivot to the landmines, the pitfalls to avoid. Pitfall number 1, which we've kind of touched on, the generic quote. Statements like, this represents a significant milestone. They just drain the life out of a release because, well, they could apply to any company, any activity, any day. They mean nothing.
Pitfall number 2 is overuse. Look, you might have 2 or 3 really great quotes, but if you stuff too many in, you just dilute the power of the message. You turn what should be a news story into this confusing Q&A session. And this is where that crucial metric comes in. Keep your quotes under 12% of the total content.
That 12% rule feels really important. So if we have a standard, say, a 400-word press release, that means no more than about 48 words of quoted material, which basically limits us to 2, maybe 3 short, powerful quotes, maximum. And if you violate that rule, what actually happens?
What happens is the press release starts to read like some disjointed script, not a coherent narrative. The journalist can't find the necessary context between all these competing voices. It gets messy. I've personally seen journalists just skip otherwise decent releases because they couldn't separate the actual news facts from the just deluge of quoted opinions. The key is to amplify the news, not drown it out.
Right. Okay, and the final pitfall, maybe the most damaging, fabrication. Even if you write a quote that sounds technically good, if the leader didn't actually approve it, or if it just lacks their genuine voice, you risk immediate trust erosion.
Absolutely. If you write a quote without your leader's real input and it lacks that natural conversational pattern, journalists, remember, they read hundreds of these things a week, they can spot manufactured quotes instantly, like that. And the moment a reporter questions a quote's authenticity, you've compromised not just that single release, you've potentially damaged your organization's entire long-term media relationship. You've basically signaled to them that your corporate voice just isn't trustworthy. Big problem.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, I think. Shifting from the warnings to the practical strategies, how do we actually do this? As communicators, how do we elicit and capture this necessary fire, this passion we've been talking about?
We have to prioritize visionary language. This is the kind of language that elevates statements from just informational to genuinely inspirational. So instead of only describing the current facts, you should try framing statements around future possibilities, maybe industry transformation, or these bold, memorable commitments that clearly establish thought leadership. It's really about projecting 5 steps ahead, showing where things are going.
And the best writing tip, according to our sources, it's actually to sit down with the leader for a conversation, not a formal, stiff interview. Record these sessions and listen closely. Listen for those key unscripted moments. When does their voice change? When do they get specific, maybe lean forward? When do they speak from the heart about a real pain point?
That's where you find the authentic gold.
Yeah, and focus on capturing personal pronouns like I or we, because those references prove real lived experience. Saying something like, I've spent 20 years watching small businesses struggle with this exact issue that carries immense weight, way more than generic corporate speak ever could.
Exactly. And we really have to deconstruct the brilliant examples provided in the source material. They perfectly illustrate how to use that emotional resonance and specificity. Let's start with handling difficult topics. Specifically, the idea of failure.
Right. The bland version of commitment is always, we are committed to excellence and innovation in everything we do. It's just hollow, right? But the impactful version, the one that uses specificity and failure is, every product failure taught us something our competitors will never learn. That's our competitive edge.
Okay, wait a minute, though. For the skeptical listener out there, isn't admitting failure or setbacks in a press release incredibly risky? Why does that quote actually work?
It works because it doesn't just dwell on the failure itself. It reframes the pain as like proprietary learning. It's something only they have. It signals this deep commitment to the process, not just the final outcome. And it instantly establishes a competitive advantage that's specific to the company. It basically transforms a potential weakness into a real differentiator. It makes you want to know more about their journey, doesn't it?
Precisely. It's the difference between hollow corporate platitudes and genuine dedication, proven through actual experience. Okay, next example. Vision communication. If your quote falls flat, it sounds something like this. Our company values sustainability and growth. Benign, forgettable.
But if the vision truly resonates, it sounds bold, maybe even a little disruptive. We're building technology that makes our current products obsolete, because someone will, and it should be us.
Wow, that is a phenomenal example. Confidence, boldness, visionary thinking, all rolled into one. It implies they're willing to disrupt their own business model just to stay ahead. That sparks immense curiosity about where the company's heading. It's instantly memorable, instantly quotable. Love that one.
And finally, proving dedication. The generic version is, our team works hard every day. Okay. But compelling dedication, shown through personal, memorable experience. I spent 3 nights sleeping in our lab because I refused to launch anything I wouldn't use myself.
That specific detail, sleeping in the lab, it transforms the leader from just an abstract figurehead into an actual dedicated engineer or founder. Someone who cares deeply. That is proof of passion right there. And it's a detail that a journalist can absolutely use as the lead anecdote for their entire article. Powerful stuff.
Okay, so now we have these potentially powerful quotes. We can't forget the technical mechanics, right? Making sure they actually get used properly. We need to touch on formatting and seamless integration.
Formatting is just professionalism, plain and simple. You absolutely must use standard quotation marks consistently, every time. And every single quote requires clear, consistent attribution immediately following the statement. Full name, full title. So it's, quote here, said John Smith, CEO of company name. Ambiguous phrasing like, according to sources, or something vague like that. That's a sure sign of amateurism. Avoid it completely.
And placement is strategic too. Quotes should amplify key messages, right? Not interrupt the flow. What happens if we say stick the strongest quote right in the very first paragraph? Is that good?
Generally, no. It's usually too soon. The rule of thumb for seamless integration is to place your strongest quote near the top, sure, but ideally in the second or third paragraph. After you've introduced the core news fact, you need to establish the what before you explain the why or the emotion behind it. Give it context first.
Okay, so use quotes to validate data points you've just presented. Like if the first paragraph announces massive growth, the CEO, quote, immediately following should explain what that growth actually means for customers, maybe, or the industry.
Absolutely. Spot on. And just as a final rule of placement, avoid stacking quotes back to back without some explanatory text in between. The conversation needs to flow. It has to be mediated by the narrative you're building in the press release itself. Don't just throw quotes out there randomly.
So if we tie all this advice back to the bigger picture, effective storytelling really is the currency of media coverage, isn't it? The use of these authentic human quote enhances engagement, helps people remember the information, and makes the whole business narrative resonate long after they've finished reading.
Totally. When you prioritize that genuine, unique voice over the standard corporate armor, you're building bridges. Bridges between corporate messaging and real human connection. And that connection, that's what earns coverage. That's what creates lasting impact.
So what does this all boil down to for you, the listener?
Well, the sweet spot for PR success seems to be right, where authentic emotion meets strategic messaging. The most effective quote captures real passion or vision or genuine insight, all in under 20 words. And that leads to massive improvement in media appeal.
Yeah, if you leave the listener with just one thought, maybe it should be this. Every business leader has a story about their motivation, their struggle, their ultimate vision. Your job isn't really to write a quote for them. It's to capture that specific moment when they express that truth themselves. Find the gold.
Okay, so here's a final provocative thought for you to take away and consider. If the real goal is to give journalists that perfect, ready-made soundbite, what specific, maybe almost vulnerable detail, what up-all-night passion project or hard-won failure could you share from your leadership? Something that completely transforms a generic corporate announcement into a story truly worth repeating. Think bold. Think specific. Think personally proven dedication.